Tarun, I want you to play the role of Gary Gensler. Put yourself into his mind. Give me your best improv of what would Gary Gensler say if you were on the show.
Well, I don't really like the dominance of the US dollar. I feel like the stablecoin thing is cementing the US dollar. I'd rather be telling companies that they have to sell themselves for US ownership, even though, they are totally fine in their rights to free speech distribution. I don't know. Like, what else do you want
Tarun,
me to say?
you failed your acting class. I'm sorry.
Not a dividend.
It's a tale of two Kwans.
Now, your losses are on someone else's balance sheet.
Generally speaking, airdrops are kind of pointless anyways.
Unnamed trading firms who are very involved.
I like that ETH is the ultimate Ponzi.
DeFi protocols are the antidote to this problem.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chopping Block. Every couple of weeks, the four of us get together and give the industry insider's perspective on the crypto topics of the day. So quick intros. First, we got Tom, the DeFi maven and master of memes.
Hello, everyone.
Next, we've got Tarun, the Giga Brain and Grand Poobah at Gauntlet.
Aloha.
And joining us today, we have Avichal, managing partner and discount Tarun at Electric Capital.
Good to see you guys.
Wow.
No, that's accurate. That's a fair and accurate description.
The resemblance is astounding, and I felt like you're bringing it out today, so I wanted to acknowledge that.
Doing my best Tarun impression.
And so I'm Haseeb, the head hype man at Dragonfly. We are early stage investors in crypto, but I want to caveat that nothing we say here is investment advice, legal advice, or even life advice. Please see choppingblock.xyz for more disclosures. Normally I would be the discount Tarun, but I don't have the hair, and I also don't have the fashion sense to be able to compete with him. So I respect the attempt.
Thank you.
And you were saying that the two of you get confused often.
I can't tell if Tarun's like offended or flattered right now.
Well, I think there are all these like anons who for a long time would just send me pictures being like, hey, this guy who looks like you. And I bet you probably got the same thing. So
I did. I was instructed today to wear clashing outfits as though I'm colorblind. That was the instructions I was given.
Those are good. That's the right. That is the correct set of instructions.
Very nice.
I did my best.
Okay,
I tried.
So let's jump into it. We got a lot of news to get through today. So Avichal, just for everybody's context, Avichal runs one of the largest firms in the space, Electric Capital. They're also a VC fund based in Silicon Valley. You guys have been an early investor into EigenLayer. Everybody on the show is an EigenLayer investor to some extent, some more than others. So EigenLayer, we talked about it last week. EigenLayer, for those of you who don't know, it's a restaking protocol. I guess it's now more than a restaking protocol. Now it's an intersubjective work token, as it's called, but whatever, the market says it's a restaking protocol, so we'll call it that. So they were the highest TVL protocol in crypto. Over $15 billion were deposited into EigenLayer. And those deposits were in search of points, which the expectation was that would eventually convert into an airdrop. So that airdrop took place last week, and that airdrop was very widely criticized for several reasons. One reason being that many people were geo-blocked, although they were allowed to receive points and participate in staking, they were not able to receive, they were not eligible to receive their airdrop for their points. And then second, the fact that it was a linear distribution, meaning that the more dollars you had at stake, proportionally, the more tokens you received. And many people criticized EigenLayer because they were small stakers. They didn't get very much in the way of points. And as a result, they didn't get very much in the way of an airdrop. So after receiving lots and lots of criticism from the community, EigenLayer basically went to the community and said, hey guys, first of all, there's been a lot of speculation that the VCs are going to be unlocking before the rest of the team. This is not true. The investors the investors and the team will be unlocking with a 1-year cliff after the tokens are transferable. So the other element is that, so EigenLayer came out and announced that they were going to be, in response to the community feedback, as they called it, they decided that they are now going to do an airdrop to all addresses that interacted with EigenLayer. So 200,000 addresses will each get 100 Eigen, which is something on the order of about $1,000, according to what right now the Eigen tokens are being priced at using the AVO futures. Eigen token, of course, is not transferable. There's no real price yet, but that's what the market thinks the price of these Eigen tokens will be worth. So many people have described this as basically protocol bullying. Essentially, lots and lots of people getting really mad at the protocol and forcing the protocol to basically back down change their mind and go ahead and distribute despite the fact that it's widely known that there were many, many industrial airdrop farming operations taking place on EigenLayer. And EigenLayer more or less capitulated and said, look, we were planning to create a distribution that didn't reward those people, but everybody's mad. So we are going to go ahead and distribute more tokens in order to reward those people as well, which feels like, and many people criticize them for this, feels like fundamentally rewarding people and advancing the meta such that people who are doing industrial airdrop farming are more incentivized to continue doing that because of the scale of rewards that they've received for doing these kinds of very, very large scale airdrop farming. Okay, so there's a second airdrop farming story, and I want to tie these two together because it feels like the conversation about airdrops is tying both of these together. So a second protocol called LayerZero. LayerZero is probably the largest decentralized bridge protocol. They have a huge amount of activity crossing many, many chains, including Solana, Sui, Aptos, as well as many of the things in the EVM ecosystem. So LayerZero's airdrop has been very, very widely anticipated. And they finally announced that they were going to do their airdrop distribution, but they know that there's a lot of addresses that have been interacting with LayerZero who are Sybils. Sybil meaning that these are users who are creating fake addresses to try to pretend that they're multiple users when in fact it's only one person controlling many, many addresses. So LayerZero announced a Sybil self-reporting program such that if you are a Sybil, if you were industrial airdrop farming, you're creating lots and lots of accounts, you know what you did. And if you are willing to report yourself, you will get 15% of the allocation you would have otherwise received if you were a good actor. However, if they find you and they know that you're a Sybil, they're going to take 100% of your allocation away. And if you report somebody else and you know that they were a Sybil, then you get some portion of their reward. So now this is actually not the first time that this mechanism has been tried, but it is by far the largest scale of this kind of airdrop report or Sybil attack reporting structure that we have seen in crypto. And this has also resulted in a lot of both commentary on the positive side as well as criticism. So this feels like a week where the metagame around airdrops is shifting. And we're going to learn a lot from how these two airdrops affect future airdrops and future token and points distributions. So I want to stop there and get a read from you guys. What do you think about EigenLayer backing down and LayerZero doing this new self-reporting Sybil mechanism? Avichal, want to get your response?
Well, I think on the EigenLayer one, it's interesting you framed it that way because I actually interpreted it slightly differently. I interpreted it as there were two separate things that were going on. They did this sort of linear drop to sort of disincentivize the Sybil attackers. But then my understanding or my read, I could be wrong on this obviously, but my read was people were upset that they didn't give enough to the small people. And so it was not so much that the Sybil stuff was an issue, it was they felt that they were not being, like, you want to sort of reward the small guy in some sense, and that's what the purpose of these things is supposed to be. And so that adjustment that they were making, my interpretation of it was that it was intended not so much as like a Sybil back down kind of a situation. It just, the side effect happens to be that if you had Sybil the thing, you might have gotten more, but the intention was to try to reward the small guys. I don't know, I'm curious, Tom, you're nodding. Was that your read too?
Yeah, I think that is right. The problem is you can't know which addresses are Sybil generated addresses and which ones are genuine small stakers. Like, obviously, in an ideal world, it would be great to give every single individual a fixed amount of the token supply, and then maybe some linear scalar component based on how much they've staked or how much volume done or whatever. But in practice, it's just like basically impossible to do that, and I think that's why they kind of have this problem. And I don't know. I think it feels very goofy too, just because for the amount of Eigen that they're giving for the projected dollar amount, it's not like this is going to be so meaningful for the people who are transacting on ETH mainnet and therefore actually putting ETH into EigenLayer. It feels like spiritually, I understand the idea of, again, wanting to reward these small players, but it feels like it's really like you can't really, I think, frame this in a way that that's actually what it's trying to accomplish. Like, the only reason why someone would be happy about getting 100 Eigen is if they had thousands of addresses and they were a Sybil attacker, and this is their new sort of yield source.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I don't disagree with that. I think where it comes from more is that, like, the points themselves were supposed to be signaling the token allocation that you'd be receiving, right? If you wanted points to be sublinear or superlinear, I guess, meaning that the fewer, no wait, what does that function? Decaying, right? Decaying over time. If you wanted the points allocation to be decaying over time, such that when you created a new address, you got more points in the beginning and your points tapered off the bigger you were, that would be a way of signaling to people, I want more addresses, right? I expect you to receive fewer tokens the bigger you are. But that's not what they were signaling. They were signaling very clearly, we're rewarding one thing, which is TVL over time. And when you sort of go back and you say, oh, whoops-a-daisy, we didn't realize that there were a lot of real people who didn't get a lot of token allocation relative to the big guys. Really what they're saying is that, the rewards that we gave you, which we signaled very, very clearly during the, people knew very clearly what the allocative mechanism for the points were, that people were just ultimately not happy with the fact that, this thing which had $15 billion in it.
That's actually where I disagree. That's where I disagree with you. I think the Bitcoin maxi equivalent for this cycle should be not your on-chain Merkle distribution, not your real tokens, right? Like if this point system doesn't give you any contractual guarantees over the actual redemption amount, then that's your fault for fucking believing that. Like that's a terms of service thing that you participated in, and you misappropriately assumed it was pro rata or had some minimum threshold, but like that's not true, right? It's not an airdrop in that sense. It's not like a standard liquidity mining airdrop. And you, the user, subscribe to that, and that's, I don't know. To me, that people are fighting.
Sorry, it's not clear to me what side you're criticizing in that.
Well, I'm criticizing this idea, like you're kind of making it seem like, oh, people like expected some allocation, that the allocation was codified, and there was a allocation rule that was somehow mapping points to tokens that was publicly known, and that's not true, right? For none of these point systems is that true, unless the points are actually on chain and there's like a
right. But I mean, you've made this point on a previous show that like people back into figuring out what the allocative mechanism is.
No, I agree, but they made a wrong mistake in their model, right? That's the point. Like there were a ton of people. For instance, Friend.Tech points were the greatest example of this, where there was like many people writing out like, because I think Friend.Tech's initial point distributions were really bad, and it was kind of easy to figure out the particular actions that were getting like 90% of the points. And people were doing these very simple linear regressions to what people's on-chain actions were. And they're like, oh, okay, clearly this thing is the highest elasticity, so we're all going to just like spam our own chat. Stuff like that would like get you more points than having other people talk in your chat. There was like a bunch of like weird little mishaps in how they're doing the allocation. And so the point of these point systems is to give the dev team flexibility. But by that also means that you, the user, have no guarantee, right? You have some expected allocation that you can fit, but you might have fit it very incorrectly. And I think like
right, but this is not the point system turning into tokens. This is like that was all done. That was the original token distribution, was the point system converting into tokens.
No, but like
then everyone
people
got
are getting angry. People are getting angry because they had some model in their head of what they thought it would be before it was distributed. And then they saw this huge gap between what they got and what was distributed, and then they're like, "Okay,
yes,
we want what we thought." Right? My point is that this is the reason I bring up the "not your keys, not your coins" type of thing. Is if you have no guarantees or commitment to the strategy for distribution, then don't fucking expect that you should get a certain number of tokens. Right? That's a mindset problem. And obviously, the teams are caving, but they're not caving fully either. Right? They're definitely not giving into all the demands. And I would say LayerZero is taking the most aggressive version of not caving. The interesting thing that I've been kind of wondering about the Sybil stuff in the long run is like who, at some point the industrial air farmers will have sufficient resources and scale to just try to sue the teams. And like the teams are very easy to sue.
Wait, what? On what basis would they sue the teams?
That's an interesting take.
I think there will be a world in which, so like your terms of service promises X, you are in the US.
I don't think
fall
any of these
under
have
the
terms
FTC.
of service. Do these points programs have terms of service?
It's a good question.
I've never seen one. I've never seen one.
I think there could be.
If anything, it's going to be the other way. If anything, if I'm a lawyer affiliated with any of these projects, I'm putting in a bunch of terms that are like no expectation of anything. We can do whatever the F we want. Like screw you. Like
it's true. But someone will make a mistake. And someone will make a mistake, and I think there will be a way that
the way it could work is that's a good negotiation tactic. Like, I'm going to sue you. Like the threat of the loss, it's like not in like practical terms in business, the lawsuit doesn't often go to trial, right? More often than not, it's settled. It's just a negotiation tactic. So as I'm thinking about it, Tarun, I think I might be convinced by you. I think there will be resources that these Sybils have, and then they will threaten the lawsuit, and it's actually cheaper to settle than to deal with the threat of the lawsuit. And then so you might just have to settle. That's a kind of an interesting take. It's an interesting tactic that I can imagine somebody using.
I think
it's the other
especially
way
if people
around.
view these anti-Sybil things as discriminating against them for what they consider a fair use strategy under whatever your term said, and they try to sue you for that, I think that could be a large legal trial. And so for the teams, the problem for the teams is they're generally doxxed. They're generally, the engineering teams and the teams that deploy the contracts are in jurisdictions that could be sued more easily. And so I actually think like we're going to eventually see the activists in the same way you're seeing like activist DAO investing stuff happen and takeovers. I think you're going to see kind of some activist point farming stuff because the sheer economic amounts are huge.
No. I mean, clearly these teams they've made no public commitments. They have total discretion over how they distribute tokens. The tokens don't even exist
but the lawsuit doesn't, to Avichal's point, the lawsuit isn't about the actual merits, right?
Yeah,
the lawsuit is like the people complaining on Twitter.
It's a frivolous lawsuit.
Thing.
Yeah,
right.
But
But these teams have money, right? Like these Sybil farmers don't have money. That's why they're Sybiling.
But the Sybil farmers, I think the Sybil farmers will eventually have enough collective cash to do this.
It'd be a Sybil farmer class action. Is that the idea?
Class action, yeah, class action for Sybil farmers.
I do not buy this.
The reason I think it is, I think these like Sybil detection things are going to be a little bit like, the Chainalysis lawsuit where they're like, oh, it's not scientific, and like people are trying to sue them for like, oh, you use Chainalysis to detect us and whatever. I think you can make the exact same argument for a lot of the heuristics people use in the Sybil farming stuff. And that is enough to like waste a lot of money in court. Like even if the teams win, they're going to like end up distributing like 5% of their token to lawyers. So it's like, do you distribute to lawyers or these Sybil farmers?
I think
look at the FTX thing. Look at the FTX thing. Look at the FTX thing. Look at the recovery of the lawyers.
That's very different. That is very different. Like bankruptcy is a totally different thing.
I think the lawyers are going to get like your whatever X percent the farmers wanted. There's some conservation law. Either you give it all to the farmers or you give it to the lawyers or both in some combo.
I totally disagree. I think if you're battling a bunch of frivolous lawsuits from like stupid farmers who have these like ludicrous legal claims, it might cost you a couple $100,000 to like defend against those lawsuits. It's not millions of dollars. It's definitely not billions of dollars. So
I think
most of these teams, no. That's just not true. Like we've dealt with some of these frivolous lawsuits because we're a crypto VC, and it doesn't cost millions of dollars to defend against them, especially when there's no real legal theory.
I think when there's many of them trying to do a class against you, it's quite different than just like three people. The usual three people I participate in a DAO lawsuit.
No. 3 people is worse. A class action is easier because they're in one class. So there's one lawsuit.
I think you might get some. I don't know. You might.
Okay,
you might
we'll see. I don't want to go down too far.
I'm willing to bet on this that this will happen.
You're willing to bet on this?
Willing to work on commission for the Eigen airdrop.
Hold on. Okay, if you seriously want to bet on this, I will bet you on this.
Within
but you got to put in an exclusion that Tarun can't be the one doing the lawsuit. Like he can skew the results.
That's true. Actually, he might Sybil this lawsuit himself.
He can win this lawsuit
5
very
years.
easily.
I'm not doing a 5-year bet. I'm not doing a 5-year bet. Come on.
Okay.
Also, this Sybil point stuff is probably not even going to continue for 5 years.
Really? There's just going to be a new version of it.
Oh yeah, it's going to get
exactly. I think the meta will shift. The meta will shift. There'll be some new thing.
I mean, dude, imagine how good AI is going to get on this stuff, and you just like let a bunch of agents loose on this. It's going to be 10x harder to detect.
Auto lawsuit. Imagine they Sybil and they file the lawsuit.
Yeah,
that's your real on-chain agent.
Okay, all right. I want to get Tom. I want you to give the last word here on the airdrop stuff. Again, you are the resident fuck airdrops person. What is your take on what a team should do now? Let's say you are starting from scratch. You're beginning your points program. What have you learned from this week within LayerZero and the EigenLayer drama? What is the new playbook?
Very hard to say. I think part of it is with something like EigenLayer, there's a very clear narrative and story around why it should be sort of time capital weighted. Whereas for a lot of other, I think airdrops, it's like, well, if you provided, liquidity on Blur and you had sort of resting, bids and asks, like, how do you sort of, you provide, points for that? And how do you sort of provide some sort of function that converts the value that you're providing into some sort of type of points? And so I think as always, it's sort of context dependent. I do kind of wish EigenLayer had not sort of folded to the community. I think most of what people were upset by was the geo blocking stuff and the lockup terms, I don't really get the impression that, again, this was a meaningful sticking point for all of these addresses. I think that the LayerZero thing, I think is very clever around self-reporting to get the 15% of the intended allocation. But it also reminds me a little bit of people who say that, oh, there should be a policy that if you hack a protocol, you can return 90% of the hack and keep 10%, and you can sort of walk away scot-free. And they're like, oh, well, that's our bug bounty effectively. And I think in practice, that just creates an incentive to hack the protocol because you sort of have this dollar value placed on what the proceeds are going to be. And so I think similarly, hey, maybe this worked one time for LayerZero, and maybe it's kind of clever. But I'm a little bit worried about this becoming a precedent going forward, just because, well, now you know that you can Sybil attack a protocol as much as you want, self-report, and walk away with still a pretty large sum of cash. And again, there's very little marginal cost to spinning up a new address, doing some transactions, which is kind of the whole point of Sybil attacks in the first place.
Yeah, 15% means that if you did 7 Sybils, you basically get a 1x.
You've made it up, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I the reason I bring up the lawsuit stuff is like I just like generally feel like in crypto these things always kind of these like I'm excluding some subset of users or I'm censoring in some way always ends up somehow in the lawsuit. Maybe in like the reason I bring this up is that Chainalysis lawsuit I was kind of surprised by how long it lasted and how intense it was about trying to prove that it discredited it and try to get it to not be used in police investigations. And I kind of feel like the Sybil stuff could be viewed in a very similar light legally. And so that was my real.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about SocialFi, because a lot of the stuff in SocialFi feels like the exact opposite of what's happening with LayerZero.
Well, Tom's an influencer now. Tom's the biggest influencer on this.
I've been cyberbullied into posting more on Twitter about my fantasy topic. I was checking out.
Congrats, Tom.
Thank you.
Tom, can you explain what is Fantasy Top? Because I think most people are not familiar.
Fantasy Top is fantasy sports for social media. So instead of drafting your favorite athletes and putting them into your roster and getting matched up against somebody else for the week, you pick your favorite crypto Twitter influencers and you pick some of their cards from a deck and you enter a tournament, and your performance is based on how well they perform in terms of engagement, views, reach, all that kind of stuff for the given tournament. So that's the sort of core idea.
So so we've seen a lot of activity in SocialFi over the last couple of weeks. SocialFi meaning social finance, which is kind of this DeFi equivalent for social applications. The most famous of which, of course, was Friend.Tech, which you might remember last year was the super hot SocialFi application that kind of more or less invented the category. Now, Friend.Tech, their activity really fell off after last summer, but they've been teasing that they're going to launch a token, and they recently did over the course of the last week. They launched their token, currently trading somewhere in the order of about 200 million fully diluted valuation. But interestingly, and again, in opposition to a lot of the tokens that have come out in this cycle, Friend.Tech supposedly has no VC allocation and has also no team allocation. So the token is completely just 100% community distribution, or at least that's what the team seems to be indicating. It's kind of not super clear, but that's what everybody seems to be interpreting them as saying. So they launched a couple new features, although the app was kind of buggy when it initially launched. It's very much far from all-time highs, but we're seeing a little bit of a comeback for Friend.Tech and getting a little bit of rejuvenation into the protocol. And then you've got Fantasy Top, as Tom just mentioned, this new viral game on Blast. Right now, it's got about 33,000 weekly active users, 9,000 ETH in trading volume. Apparently, there are more addresses trading Fantasy Top cards than trading all NFTs on Ethereum. So Fantasy Top has really kind of grabbed people's I don't know, imagination is the word, but it's certainly been super high engagement. So what do you guys see? What are you guys seeing with respect to this kind of comeback and this narrative shift with respect to SocialFi?
Well, for some historical context, I don't know if people know this or remember this, but my top friends, like this was a genre of apps on the Facebook app platform back in like 08, 09, like almost 15 years ago at this point. And they also went super viral in the early days. And then the engagement just wasn't there. Like ultimately they weren't sticky. I don't remember all the details exactly, but it sort of fell off pretty quick.
What was the game? What was the mechanic?
Oh, literally you would like collect your top friends. There were all sorts of variations of it. You could collect your top friends, you could rank them. You could buy and sell friends. And so there's sort of like an implicit leaderboard, like very, very similar mechanics that we're basically reinventing here. Now, of course, the two differences, I think, one, you're dealing with real money here, not like fake points, inside some Canvas app. And two, back then, social wasn't nearly as developed as it is today. So there wasn't this notion of influencer. And so like you didn't have like data, like in fantasy sports, you have data, like you scored a touchdown or something. So it's like, what are you speculating on? Like you need some input that is variable over time and somewhat unpredictable to be able to speculate in that way. And that didn't really exist at the time on Facebook. The network was not developed enough yet. And so, I mean, there's an argument that between real money and sort of the randomness of, like how many impressions is Tom going to get this week or something, that maybe there's some stickiness to this thing. But it's interesting because this is actually not the first time, we're sort of like reinventing all the social stuff from 15, 20 years ago because humans haven't really changed in 20 years. So it's actually all the same mechanics from 20 years ago.
What I find interesting, I mean, the Friend.Tech allocation is kind of the perfect counterpoint to what a lot of people have been criticizing, EigenLayer, LayerZero for being these VC coins. Friend.Tech, although it was backed by a VC, it was backed by Paradigm. Supposedly Paradigm has no allocation in the token, which, I mean, again, let's take it at face value that that's true. And yet the token doesn't seem to be doing amazing. Doesn't have great liquidity. People were kind of anticipating that.
But it has liquidity all in one venue. That's the
Bunny swap.
Bunny swap.
Okay.
That's where the money is.
Okay.
There's always money in the bunny swap.
Why is that good? why is that a positive?
They take a huge fee. They take a huge fee on it.
Oh, on trading in within Bunny Swap.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The trading fee is not zero, my friend.
I see. Okay.
In fact, it's quite high. It's like 1.5% or something.
Yeah.
But nothing stops you from just going and putting it into any other AMM, right?
It's kind of like wrapped in a weird way. Like there are ways around it, but it's much more gas expensive. So it's kind of this thing where it's actually it's kind of a clever way of designing something so that you're kind of pseudo locked into a venue.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so they're like intentionally advantaging their own AMM for trade efficiency for this token, just to like try to encourage themselves to be able to capture the trading revenue.
Yeah, but there is a wrapped version of Friend I've seen floating around that, in theory, hey, if that gets enough liquidity and volume, it kind of gets around this. But
I think it's just the gas thing is like annoying. But the perps are trading a lot now, so like I feel like people, if they really care, aren't really trading spot. But the people with the airdrop are trading spot. So it's kind of an interesting model, right? Of like it's almost like being the ICO venue for your own token on chain, and then eventually people, eventually it gets everywhere. But like for the first amount, you get to capture some revenue.
Well, you know what this actually reminds me of? This is actually a really common pattern in consumer social, which is that your moat and your monetization are different. So like if you look at Facebook, the moat is all the friends content because you just can't get that anywhere else. It's like somebody had a baby or somebody got married or whatever. But the monetization is all the public stuff, right? It's like, some small business needs to promote something or like there's some news thing. And if you get rid of the moat, the monetization, you just sort of like Facebook would collapse to Yahoo News. It's not that useful and not that good a business. And that combination is really powerful. And so it's actually really interesting to see that like the monetization is different than the moat. Like the moat is like the organic content that people want to sort of like come and see and the prices and all that kind of stuff. But then they sort of have a totally different monetization model. That's actually really clever. And it parallels actually what you kind of see in traditional social as well.
I mean, there was also FarCon this week, the Farcaster conference. Curious to get you guys' take. Like, do you feel like we're seeing a renaissance in SocialFi on chain, or is this like a isolated phenomenon? Is this like sort of one thing happening in one corner, or does this feel like a bigger part of a bigger wave?
I'm in the bigger wave camp.
Tom. I guess I'm also kind of in this bigger wave. It feels kind of like there are these little blips. And it's not overall indicative to me of, hey, clearly this thing is happening, or, oh yeah, there's definitely PMF, but it's like there's that kind of consumer PMF spark that sometimes starts to burn and turns into a fire, and sometimes it kind of fizzles out. But it's just very rare to see that spark, especially frankly in crypto, where a lot of stuff feels much more transactional, purely sort of financialized, maybe gamed or incentivized in some way. And a lot of this does it is organic. Independent of some of these other platforms. And I think that's just kind of rare to find and rare to see.
Tarun, do you agree? Wave?
I feel like, to be honest, it still feels like this is like, for lack of a better phrase, poke with money. Like Facebook pokes. It's like only a little bit better than that. It doesn't feel like we've kind of like got the full experience. When you compare the crypto social apps to like TikTok. I know you shouldn't be comparing the two extremes, but like, it sort of
Hey,
feels a
Dracula.
little bit like. Sure. That's true. There's also disclosure. I'm a Dracula investor, so I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that as but what I mean, it's still not the same. Like the content stuff isn't the same. The kind of like
that's true.
The feed algorithms aren't the same. Stuff like so. But my point is, in the same way, like pokes felt really dumb, but they like encouraged user actions that like people thought were too silly or too weird or whatever. I feel like there's a lot of that in the SocialFi stuff now, where it's like silly actions that people are like spending money on. And so like there's sort of this like weird aspect of that, which feels like it's real, but it's not clear to me what the velocity is. Like it's clearly like the gradient is positive. Is it like barely positive or is it really growing? And I don't have that much of an opinion on that. I think the finding new monetization mechanisms outside of the airdrop thing, that is I think that if we can find more of those, then like that to me feels like a real thing.
Yeah, Tarun, I tend to agree with you that it feels a little too isolated to me, of like these kind of little pockets of things happening, but none of them are really. It's sort of like, the early conditions for life. You kind of need a certain amount of acidity and a certain amount of complexity in the air, and I feel like that's what we have right now. Yeah. But we haven't actually seen life start to like self-replicate.
This reminds me, we've been talking about this internally a lot, actually, because we have a bunch of, I was at Facebook for years and we have a bunch of ex-Facebook people. And so I don't know if you guys are talking about this internally, Tom, but to me, this feels like social 2003, which is kind of like all of the pieces of what became a social network kind of existed. There's the notion of a graph. There's the notion of a friend. There's a profile pic. There's a profile page. People had sort of proto feeds. You had the poke. You had kind of the beginnings of the like in like 2005. Like all of those little components existed. And so now what we have are things like you have AMMs, you have frames on Farcaster, you have the ability to do micropayments, you have every app as a wallet. You have this notion of like, friend content or like you can buy the friend. Like you kind of have these like little, components. And Haseeb, kind of the way you put it is I think right too, is like it's sort of the preconditions for life. Like you got a bunch of RNA snippets like floating around. And like they're going to come together at some point in the next couple of years because somebody's going to figure out like the magic is, it's this kind of a graph propagated in this way. It's this sort of an edge. It's bidirectional or unidirectional. It's this kind of privacy model. The asset that people really want to buy is XYZ. The way you monetize it is ABC. And it's because you have the wallet baked in. Like all of the preconditions are there. And so to me, I don't even think we've hit MySpace yet, just to be clear. But like that MySpace moment when it happened, there's this light bulb that went off for a lot of people that were like, okay, this is the thing. I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe Farcaster is that thing. But I think we have all the necessary preconditions now. And so I'm actually quite optimistic that sometime over the next like 2 to 4 years, somebody's going to stumble into the thing that gets to 100 million users like pretty fast.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is sort of that signs of life thing. And there's people kind of get some of the components now to start remixing. Like this feels a lot more interesting and real than like Steam It, from like 8 years ago or whatever, where it's like not just random, like decentralized Twitter. It's like, okay, there's a reason why this stuff is interesting and novel and differentiated from everything that people have kind of been trying before. And I think that kind of shows in some of the numbers.
So the one thing I will say is like so far, other than this Friend.Tech AMM monetization thing, I feel like we haven't seen anyone go do any like radical experiments with how they're, getting people to pay for things. Like for instance, one type of thing that is my personal like hobby horse. And I'm always like trying to find people who are working like kind of adjacent to this, because like I always meet these people at hackathons, but no one ever like wants to do it for longer than a hackathon, which maybe says something. But in the normal social world, the ranking algorithm, the newsfeed, the ordering is sort of like completely controlled by the central entity. Like, yeah, sure, there's ad exchanges and ad auctions that like impact some of the feed, but generally the quality of feed is more valuable than like the ads in the feed for in order to keep up like retention statistics and stuff like that. But these open social graphs have this like kind of crazy ability where like I can give everyone their own sort of weird feed and people can pay to be like higher in your feed, more expressed in your feed, whatever, right? And I think Friend.Tech is kind of getting in that with these rooms where like, the clubs, yeah. And I kind of feel like that is the part that's like missing to me right now, is like this idea of taking advantage of the graph to give very like monetized views of the same data, where like people pay to either show you a particular view of the world, like an influencer. It's not just the influencer showing you an ad. They're like showing you like a montage, right? They're showing you kind of like they're giving you the entire TikTok recommendations they would, right? They're able to like control the algorithm that generates the recommendations, or something that like does something like that takes advantage. And I just feel like we haven't quite crossed the chasm where it's easy to do those types of things yet. Like it feels like it's still a little bit hard for developers to do that type of stuff. And the AMM thing is great because it's like people understand it. It's easy to add a fee to, whatever, right? But I feel like the next level would be actually using the social data and like finding weird monetization things that make sense.
Well, I was gonna say two things. One, it's not immediately obvious to me that developer friction is necessarily a bad thing. Like another little sort of tidbit from consumer social history, Friendster was really taking off. Friendster was the thing before MySpace, and Friendster fell apart because they didn't have a good way to do the like they did a bunch of assumptions about like how to load pages, and the performance is terrible. And one of the things that they really struggled with was how to traverse the graph to find like your second degree connections. And so it was actually like still a pretty clunky developer experience to build a social network in 03. But like it was just good enough that you could get a couple million people on it. And then one thing you said, Tarun, actually kind of, for me, the light bulb moment was actually frames and the Girl Scout cookie experiment, if anybody was tracking that. Because the inline buy is a totally different monetization model, and you don't need ads if you can just buy stuff inline, because you can just take a vig. And that to me was a huge light bulb moment, because all of a sudden it was like, oh, you don't need ads in this thing if you can drive commerce through these things, which has always been actually one of the holy grails. Like if you think about the internet, there's like two business models at a high level on the internet, right? There's attention and intention, and Facebook and YouTube really capture attention, but they've always struggled to capture intention. And whereas like, Google and Amazon capture intention. And so what's really interesting about these social networks to me is like, if you could capture intent and then monetize that intent, you would actually have a fundamentally different business model. And so to me, the light bulb moment was actually frames on the monetization side.
So this is kind of taking it in a slightly different direction, but I was catching up with Kyle Samani recently, and he was telling me that in the Multicoin Investment Committee, Kyle has banned the use of any analogies. If you use an analogy, you are automatically like kicked out of investment committee. Yeah. And so like all these analogies to traditional social media, I wonder a little bit if we are sort of over-reliant on basically this idea that, okay, we're kind of speed running the history of social media and we're going to like play it back in the same order. Because on some level, if we do, I think we, on some level, just kind of arrive at a worse version of what's already there, right? Like we're sort of kind of stamping in the territory of the Mastodons and the Truth Socials and the whatever, because like it's actually very hard to fill the niche that's just, okay, let's like find a very close permutation of a social network that already exists. It does seem to me like if crypto social works, it's going to fill a niche that nobody else is filling. And that's why it's going to be so good, right? There's going to be something that's kind of weird about the particular way in which you want to express yourself and you want to interact with this particular network. I don't have a clear enough thesis about what that is, but it does feel to me like if you hew too closely to, well, we're going to go through the same iterations as, kind of Web 2 social media, I think you end up arriving at what a lot of these social media pitches I get are, which are basically, look, I'm going to transpose an existing social network into crypto. And those seem to almost reliably not work.
Yeah, well, they're guaranteed to not work. But I think the interesting thing, and I do think reasoning by analogy is very risky, but to me, the interesting takeaway is not that the reasoning by analogy gets you to the outcome. The interesting part of the exercise is that is how the market reasons through what to do. So like the first wave of stuff that doesn't work is going to be people doing these skeuomorphic things in social. And so they're going to pattern match to what worked. And so the fact that that's happening to me is why it's sort of like proto-social. It's like, we're not actually at the place yet in the market where people are like combining these novel primitives in a way that is actually going to be crypto native. But the fact that we've now gotten to a point where people are trying to recreate and speed run the stuff that worked previously is actually, to me, the precursor signal. Because I agree with you, and I agree with Kyle that that's like not the right way to figure out what's going to work. But to me, the market has that's like the necessary step that the market goes through before it figures out what's actually going to work.
Right. Okay, so let's switch gears one more time, going away from the product and going more towards the legal. So it's been a busy week for legal and regulatory, and we actually skipped one story last week that I'm going to tie in here. So the SEC has been very hard at work, basically in their campaign against the crypto industry. So a couple of weeks ago, the SEC, we talked about them filing a Wells notice, which is basically letting somebody know that they intend to file a lawsuit or an enforcement action against them. They gave a Wells notice to Uniswap, and Uniswap announced that they were going to be fighting against any potential lawsuit from the SEC. The SEC also filed a Wells notice against ConsenSys, which of course is the company founded by Joe Lubin, which is kind of early Ethereum ecosystem company that is also the creator of MetaMask. So apparently the SEC claimed that MetaMask was an unregistered broker, which of course is the claim that was dismissed in the Coinbase case about Coinbase Wallet being an unregistered broker, as well as MetaMask staking being MetaMask staking products being unregistered securities, which is much in line with their claims against all the staking products that they've gone after. So now ConsenSys, beyond just saying we are going to defend ourselves and fight back in court, proactively sued the SEC in Texas, which I think is the Fifth Circuit, some circuit. I don't know. I was just talking with somebody about this the other day. So basically, under the thesis that the SEC apparently they like to bring cases in either New York or DC, because these circuits, basically the circuit being a sort of subsection of the country where your appellate system is segregated by these different circuits or these subsections of the country. There are 9, I believe. And so the SEC likes to bring cases in the circuits that tend to be kind of government favorable. So in DC and in New York, usually the judges tend to be more pro-government, whereas in Texas, surprise, surprise, the judges there tend not to like the government as much, and therefore the odds are, all things equal, that you're likely to get a more favorable ruling. And so ConsenSys sort of went on the offensive and said, we are going to proactively sue you for failing to make rules, despite the fact that you're supposed to be making rules under the Administrative Procedures Act, and you are not giving the industry clarity, and you're supposed to because of how agencies are supposed to function. So ConsenSys sued the SEC. Then a week later, Robinhood announced that they also got a Wells notice from the SEC. Now, Robinhood is relatively unique among these players. If you think of Uniswap, you think of Coinbase, you think of ConsenSys. These are all companies that are very active in crypto, and they do a lot of stuff. They have a lot of arms, and they're sort of, taking a good amount of regulatory risk. Okay, Robinhood, of course, a public company. Robinhood was pretty anodyne in their approach to crypto. They were fairly conservative, so they essentially only allowed trading of assets. They did not allow any kind of exotic tokens. It's basically, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Sol, Doge, stuff like that they basically had on the platform. And they even delisted Sol and XRP when the SEC named them in their lawsuit as an unregistered security, which none of the other platforms did. But nevertheless, Robinhood was hit with a Wells notice by the SEC. Robinhood went went to Twitter basically and did the same thing everyone else has done, which is announced, we're going to fight this lawsuit, and we believe the SEC is being unfair and capricious.
Did you also see Robinhood's quarterly earnings today?
Apparently, yeah, they were way above expectations. They killed it
because of crypto trading.
Yes, their crypto trading way.
That was the key thing. That's the key
230% outperformance.
When
but the interesting thing as well.
Yes,
but no. The interesting thing as well is that when they announced that they were going to fight back against the Wells notice, their stock dipped 2% and then fully recovered by the end of intraday trading, which also tells you that the market is no longer giving the SEC credit, right? Remember, when Coinbase got the lawsuit filed against them, the market tanked. And it was like, oh shit, this is terrible for the industry. Clearly, this means that it's over. When your regulator comes after you and basically says your business is, de facto illegal, that generally means it's lights out, right? But now going down 0% in a day, I think is crazy, right? That's like, if you see the FTC, Lena Khan has been famously very, very aggressive against all these mergers. Her win rate in court is basically zero. She's not won a single one of these cases that have actually gone to trial. It feels like the same thing is now happening to the SEC, which is that the markets are no longer giving credibility to the SEC for actually being able to win these cases. Because if it was true that the SEC is going to shut down their crypto trading business, then obviously a huge value, a huge part of the value of this business would go away.
SEC is learning a lesson from crypto itself, which is if you're a meme coin trader, you need to spam the blockchain. So, if you're the SEC, you just need to spam lawsuits with the hope that it's just like, it just overwhelms people. And I think that the spamming congestion problem has reached its max, probably because of like obviously like the bill that's just passed the House of Representatives today. There's a lot of stuff that's like not taught in their favor that's in government. Forget about these lawsuits. Basically, like, I feel like because the SEC has like all this kind of trouble in government per se, I don't think they have as many allies as they did maybe a year ago even. It feels like, the fact that so many Democrats voted for this bill maybe is some evidence for that. I feel like this is like, kind of like a tantrum by a child that's in trouble, right? Like they're like, I want everything.
I think it's actually a little bit, it's certainly political, but I think it's a little bit more nefarious than that, because I think, okay, so stepping back for a second, because I think, Haseeb, your point on the FTC is a really good one. And tying that thread, I think, is actually really important to understand what's happening. Because I spent a lot. I'm on the board of CCI, which is like us and Paradigm and Andreessen and Fidelity and Block and a couple other folks, and I do a bunch of regulatory stuff. And so I have fortunately a bunch of sort of information flow, and sort of off the record kind of stuff that we get to understand. I think what's happened is that there's been a material shift in strategy. And that's what it used to be, was that if the FTC or the SEC took you to court, they were doing it because they were really certain that they were going to win. And what's happened is there's been a strategic decision which has shifted, which is we're going to take cases to court. And if we're not losing some of these cases, we're not being aggressive enough in pursuing action. And that's a really, really important shift in terms of how the regulator interfaces with the markets and the entities that they're supposed to be regulating. And now I think, sort of assuming best intent, you might argue that it's coming from a good place, which is anybody can look at the structure of the markets right now, or the structure of society, and be like, okay, like the rich are getting richer. There's a structural problem. Like there's no political will to actually solve some of these structural issues right now. And so there are people who arguably are well-intentioned. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt for a second. I think you could reasonably disagree that they're well-intentioned and are just being political, but let's assume for a second that they're being well-intentioned. What they're essentially saying is, look, the political process is so broken that there's no way for us to meaningfully fix these issues at a structural level. And so we're going to be sort of turn these agencies into activist organizations that are going to try to fix it. Now, the problem is that they're taking on lawsuits and risks against companies like, Activision and Microsoft, or Coinbase, or Ripple, or ConsenSys, which are extremely well-capitalized companies. And those companies are saying, wait a second, there's no legal basis for what you're doing, and we still have rule of law in this country. And so they're taking it to court, and then these agencies are losing. And so I think like the second order effect of potentially well-intentioned action by people who see structural problems in society and in markets is actually causing the erosion of the integrity of these institutions, which is really, really bad. And that's actually what I worry about fundamentally, is like it's very clear these guys are going to lose in court. Like they're just like, they're so overextended. They're just like, there's no legal basis for half the stuff that these guys are doing right now. So they're just going to lose in court. But the consequence of that is you now have, to your point, Haseeb, the markets no longer trust the SEC at this point, which is terrible. Like, because there's real fraud that might happen out there. And if the SEC is going to bring cases and people don't believe that there's fraud, like you start to lose like well-functioning markets. You start to lose like rule of law, which is such an important like construct and why the economy works and why the American markets work. And that actually is very concerning to me. Like the SEC, these guys are going to turn over. We'll outlast them. ConsenSys, well, full disclosure, we're investors in ConsenSys. ConsenSys will outlast them. Coinbase will outlast them. Robinhood will outlast them. But the damage that they're doing is permanent. And that is to me is the real cause for concern here.
So I very well said, and I will underscore that with also saying that there's also a big asymmetry of power, which is that the government, like part of the reason why our system of government is set up in the way that it is because of the fact that it's well known that the government is the most powerful entity that exists. Right? There's an obvious asymmetry of powers that the government can subpoena whatever they want, and their resources. The SEC has billions of dollars, thousands of lawyers in their arsenal, and most of these companies are startups. Right now, obviously, ConsenSys, we are also investors. They're fairly well capitalized. So is Uniswap. So is Robinhood and Coinbase. They can fight for themselves. But of course, a lot of the people the SEC are going after do not have those kinds of resources, and as a result, there's a big asymmetry of power in the system, which is why, generally speaking, the presumption is that the government must have a very high burden to clear in order to go and target these people, right? These are enforcement agencies. They're basically one step removed from law enforcement. And the presumption is that you want to have a lot of checks and balances in place such that these agencies cannot just go on political prosecutions, right? They cannot just go say, look, I don't like this thing, therefore I'm going to go attack it in order to pursue some kind of policy agenda, right? Like regulators are not supposed to be setting policy. The legislature is there to enact policy, and the executive branch is there to execute the policy that's been determined by Congress within certain bounds, right? Obviously, there's a bunch of gray areas at the margins, but what's really clear to my mind is that like the system of government we have is designed to slow this kind of thing down, to make it difficult for these, each president to flip flop and totally change the regime. And that's why we have, a very slow moving government. We have gridlock in Congress, and people say, "Oh, it sucks. Why can't Congress pass laws? Why can nothing happen in this country?" That is by design. We made a system of government intentionally so that people would have predictability, and it wouldn't be the case that every 4 years or every 6 years you get entirely a new set of laws and a new set of rules, and basically companies and citizens are ultimately up to the whims of whoever gets elected over the next 4 years. And so I think that fight that we see, the fights in Congress, the fights in the courts, and the fights among the agencies, is by design. And on some level, what the SEC is doing is kind of trying to sidestep those fights and not let them play out the way that they're supposed to, and say, hey, instead of waiting for Congress to fight it out, instead of waiting for the courts to fight it out, we're just going to go and Sybil attack essentially the industry and do 1,000 lawsuits.
We started this episode with Sybils. We ended with Sybils. One is, and the only commonality, me saying that lawsuits are involved in both. That's all I got to say.
Well, mic drop. Amazing. Tom, what's your take on the SEC drama here?
Yeah,
and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I think I mostly agree. I think we'll see post-election what happens with, frankly, all the regulatory bodies right now, and if there would be sort of a regime change or just overall policy change. But I saw Gensler was on with CNBC this week being interviewed, and I want to give these agencies credit and credibility and believe that they're acting in good faith. But as with sort of the Bitcoin ETF lawsuit, like it just, there's no real reasoning or there's no really good arguments. And it's a shame because there is real fraud in the industry and there should be some regulation. People have been asking for clarity forever. And Gensler goes on TV and says, "Oh, well, you need disclosures." What disclosures? We've been asking for years and years and years around, what is the path forward for these assets? Give some guidance, and ultimately, we've received silence.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Look, if the SEC were to go out and say, "Look, here is the disclosures regime that makes sense for digital assets. Here's what you need to do in order to register," then I think everybody in the industry would be like, "Great, awesome, we will do that," right? As long as they are sensible and they're tailored to what is different and meaningfully informative for digital assets. Like we've sort of, to some level, figured out as an industry what are the useful disclosures for a crypto asset, right? Like what's the vesting schedule? What does a token do? Where's the white paper? what are the token mechanics? Where are the contracts? Point to all these things on chain so that people can go diligence them for themselves. And when we diligence things, when we talk about things on the show, we are doing that diligence, which is what otherwise any financial investor would want access to, right? But if you say that, well, no, we already have well-defined securities laws, then it's like, oh, okay, well, I need to go fill out these forms that are actually don't disclose any of the information that I just described, right? You can register a security and say nothing about a token distribution or on-chain addresses or whatever. And as a result, what's very clear is that the idea that, well, we already have laws and therefore just follow these and then you'll be fine. No other country, no other regulator in the world has come to that conclusion except the SEC, which seems to be like, okay, this is just kind of a willful, just kind of aggression toward the industry. I'm just saying, no, look, you guys don't have the right to exist. If you don't fit into our pre-existing securities laws, as pre-existing securities do, then you don't have a right to exist in financial markets. And I think overwhelmingly what you see is that, beyond just the industry, I think most people think that that's bullshit, right? Yeah, like crypto or don't like crypto, clearly crypto is a thing and it will exist. And so the question is, okay, how are you going to subsume it into an investor protection regime, which I think everybody's on board with? Like what does Binance do? What does Coinbase do? They protect investors. They try to be thoughtful about making sure that you can read information about what is this token, who's working on it, where are the tokens, how many are there, when do they get distributed? Every single place you look to that actually has retail investors' interests at heart, which of course are these exchanges which service retail, they try to give that information to retail investors. So that's why I think this narrative that the SEC has been giving, that look, we are the ones protecting retail, I think is just disingenuous.
Yeah, I think it's also hard to to have a podcast where everyone agrees so much.
All right, Tarun, give us the counterpoint. Devil's advocate.
No,
Give us the pro SEC.
I don't have one. It's like, how could you?
No, let's try anyway. Let's try anyway. Tarun, I want you to play the role of Gary Gensler. Put yourself into his mind. Give me your best improv of what would Gary Gensler say if you were on the show.
I don't think on the merits it's possible. That's what's so fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
This, right? It's just
this is a failure of imagination. Come on, Tarun, I believe in you. You can do it.
Well, I don't really like the dominance of the US dollar. I feel like the stablecoin thing is cementing the US dollar. I'd rather be telling companies that they have to sell themselves for US ownership, even though, they are totally fine in their rights to free speech distribution. I don't know. Like, what else do you want?
Tarun, you failed your acting class. I'm sorry.
The best I could do on this, I think, is like
podcast host.
I think the best you could do on this is not so much like what is the case for the other side, because I don't think there are like substantive merits to the case, but I think you could grant that there are real problems in markets and there are real problems in society, and anybody who sees the problem and has a hammer, like sees a bunch of nails and they're using the hammer, but that there are real second order consequences to these things. And the thing that I worry about, in addition to sort of the integrity of these institutions being eroded, is that there's a fundamental, even more like meta fundamental issue at stake here, which is we've seen a shift in how the U.S. government thinks about technology. And if you contrast this with how the U.S. government or other governments around the world are thinking about technology, I think the government's learned very different lessons from the internet. I think what the US government learned inadvertently, which is incorrect, is that this stuff has consequences, which is obvious, but that they need to try to control it. But the reality is the world doesn't work the way that it did in 1995 anymore. Like markets are global, capital is global, people can pick up and leave, and literally we see that happening. Like look at Ilya from Near, right? He just moved to Europe. He's one of the authors on the Transformer paper and started Near blockchain, and we're investors in Near, just full disclosure. But that's such a huge loss to lose that person as a potential U.S. citizen. And so there's like this lack of understanding of what the assumptions have changed in society. Meanwhile, the rest of the world that effectively lost the internet, like all the big internet companies are American, right? Facebook and Amazon and Google and so on, looks at this and says, oh, we botched it. What we actually need to do is embrace this stuff, because if we don't have the tech companies in our jurisdiction, we have no oversight. We can't do anything about it. And so there's this like weird, bizarro world that we live in now where like the rest of the world, because they lost the internet, is figuring out crypto. And the American government, as a consequence of winning the internet, like we just didn't learn the right lessons in this country. And so we're like totally mangling it. And it's because the fundamental assumptions about what power regulators have these days is just so wrong. It's stuck. And it's a consequence of just like the gerontocracy, right? It's like you have a bunch of these people who think the world works a certain way. Just the world doesn't work that way anymore. And it's not clear to me that they have internalized that the world doesn't work that way anymore. And it's such a huge miss. Like I'm 1,000% on Tarun, what you were talking about with like stable coins and national security. It's just like anybody who understands the role of the dollar in the world should be running so fast at crypto in the US government. And it's just such a like missed opportunity.
I think where a lot of it comes from as well is just cynicism, right? It feels like there's just an increasing cynicism about technology. Yep. And interestingly, we're also seeing it now happen in crypto.
Yep.
So this kind of ties, some of the threads we were talking about earlier with airdrop farming and VC coins and all this. There has been this increasing trend of people talking about this idea that retail investors are getting exhausted with all these VC coins, right? And these VC coins, I mean, when people say VC coins, generally what they mean is that these are venture-backed startups with technologists that are telling this big technology story about, a DA layer or a new L1 or a new L2 or whatever. And the criticism against these is that there are a lot of them. They all launch with relatively low floats and high FDVs, FDV meaning fully diluted valuation. So a small amount of the token is floating. So, 10%, 8%, whatever. But the total supply when it's fully unlocked is going to be, 10 times that or something like that. And there's a sense, or at least many people have been claiming, that retail is getting exhausted by this because they keep losing, as the supply gets unlocked and the VCs dump on them, they're just going to lose and lose and lose. So the canonical example is something like ICP or Definity, which started off with a very, very high valuation, or fully diluted valuation, has been slowly creeping down over time. And the sense of like, okay, well, retail is kind of exiting by saying, you know what, we're just going to trade meme coins because meme coins, they're fully circulating day one. There's no extra supply we have to worry about. And yeah, okay, maybe you guys are telling us big technology stories, but we don't buy it anymore. This whole thing is just a big game of musical chairs. And so we're just going to play the musical chairs amongst ourselves and cut out the middlemen, which are the bullshit VCs. So it does feel like I'm seeing the sentiment a lot. I'm also hearing it from other VCs, right? So like I was chatting with Regan Bosman from Lattice Fund, and he's been writing all these Twitter threads talking about how
He's
this cycle has been
like, I hate the casino person.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what he hates and doesn't hate, but he's been underscoring this idea that there's just like narrative exhaustion and there's too many of these VC coins. And, at a certain point, you just can't keep playing this playbook. And so it feels like that cynicism is not just the US government, it's also retail or crypto Twitter. I can't tell how much of it is actually retail and how much of it is just this sentiment is what people want to upvote right now. But at the same time, like all these high FTV launches are still having high FTVs. So it's not as though like the FTVs are coming down. So I'm curious what you guys think and how that filters into how, we talked about this a little bit on the last show, how there's all this anti-VC sentiment that seems to be materializing as a byproduct of this cycle.
I don't know if it's VC versus non-VC coin as so much as just there have not been that many extremely novel projects. It feels almost kind of like a DeFi summer moment where everyone was copy pasting, Uniswap and Yam Finance and making some tweaks and launching a token. But for L1s and L2s and bridges and all this sort of like miscellaneous infrastructure and obviously some applications as well. And I think the stuff that is novel can do well in the market. The problem is like most of this stuff is not. It's an existing thing that has been tweaked slightly, has no real activity users. I mean, there's even an article in I can't remember which publication about like zombie chains from 2017 this week, which is I think kind of the equivalent from that era, but for this era. And I don't think the VC allocation really matters that much. I mean, again, most of the top projects that we know and love, had meaningful VC allocations. The difference was that they were doing something different. They had some sort of meaningful traction, community, developers, whatever it is. And that is ultimately the number one predictor of success.
Avichal, what's your take on this?
I actually think it goes back to kind of what we're talking about with the SEC kind of stuff, which is there are real problems in society and people are frustrated. And so like a lot of this stuff to me is sort of this sense of I'm being left out of the system. Like people have talked about this sort of financial nihilism kind of stuff, and that leads to meme coins. So I think a lot of this like anti-VC sentiment is sort of like, why are people who are not creating value getting rich? That doesn't feel fair, which I think is actually a fair sentiment. Like it does feel like, like society has all these feedback loops. We talk about, in technology, we talk about feedback loops. Society has a bunch of feedback loops too. And a lot of those feedback loops have led to people who are creating far less value than they may have 20 years ago, continuing to extract massive amounts of money. And that just feels fundamentally unfair. So I'm actually sympathetic to the argument because, it does feel like the rich getting richer, and that's not healthy for society. But I don't think the problem is that there are like categories of really high value add VCs. You can go talk to the founders, right? Just go talk to the founders and be like, hey, does Electric create value? Does Robot create value? Does Dragonfly create value? Does Paradigm create value? You can like run through the list and you're like, yeah, there are actually people who roll up their sleeves and get to work with you. But I get the sentiment. Like, I think that the sentiment is coming from a reasonable place, actually, that like I'm being left out of the system and these other people keep getting richer and that feels unfair. That's like a bigger than crypto thing. Like, I think it's being manifest in crypto, but it's happening all over the world. It's happening, it's like the root cause of the SEC stuff. It's the root cause of the FTC stuff, the root cause of like the rise of populism. Like, it's happening in a lot of places. I wish I knew how to solve it. But I look at this as not like a VC coin problem. I look at this as like the structures of society and capitalism and democracy need to be reformed, and that's going to take a long time.
Tarun, what's your take? Do you agree with that? Is this like a meta social problem, or is this a more micro problem to the crypto market structure?
I think this always happens every cycle. There's always like someone angry. Yeah, like every time it's like, oh well, we found a way to get liquidity on the first set of those coins. Obviously, there's a lot of copy pasta diligence / VC that's done where people fund things that look exactly the same, 500 of them, in fact. And then, they're dumped on the market and the market says, I just don't have the demand for it anymore. And I don't know, this happens every cycle. I feel like what happens is you have this thing where it's overdone, and then in the depths of despair, you find the thing that people really care about, like in the ETH or Solana or things like, or Uniswap, right? Like things that came after that. But this is the usual like cynicism. I think there's just not an optimistic narrative in crypto right now, if we're going to be totally honest, right? Like most of it is this nihilism stuff. And like that, I feel like you can only last so long on that narrative.
So I was chatting with a couple people about this the other day. I actually don't buy this narrative. I think it's obviously in fashion right now to talk about this of like, oh, there's too many low FTV launches and it's all, these VC coins, or who's going to buy all these tokens. Like just go on Binance and just go look at what are the most traded tokens. And the answer, like that's retail. That's what retail actually is. It's not crypto Twitter. Crypto Twitter is not retail, right? Crypto Twitter is crypto influencers. And like it's a very easy mistake to make, which is to assume that crypto influencers are representatives of retail, but they are actually not. And that's true every cycle, is that you can make the mistake of assuming that what people with big followings think are what retail thinks. And it's generally wrong. And it's always wrong in a different direction. And like if you just go look on Binance at what people are trading VC coins. They're also trading meme coins, but meme coins are not dominating the market. It's not as though like, well, they're trading mostly Doge and WIF and Shiba Inu and almost nothing else. Like that's just not true. Anybody who thinks that like, well, everyone's exhausted with the VC coins, they don't care about technology, they only want to gamble on this financial nihilism stuff, that is incorrect. Go read the trading logs. That's not what they're mostly gambling on. There's a lot of people gambling on that, of course. But there's way more people buying Bitcoin and Ether and Sol and whatever, these newer coins as well that are hot, and AI coins and Near and blah, blah, blah. These are also trading huge amounts of volume. And the reality is like most of what crypto is about technology. And what we're doing here is trying to build better technology, which is most of what retail cares about. They care about this story. So there is a subset of the market that's just like, look, fuck it. Wall Street bets, nothing matters. Let's just gamble and try to make 1,000x on, absolutely meaningless dog coins. And that's okay. And there's always going to be some version of that in every cycle, because crypto is ultimately a very easy way to remix just convexity and make convexity fun and kind of dynamic. But I just don't think it's that simple of a story that VC coin's bad, meme coin's good, and you guys have ruined the party for everyone. I do think there are a lot of tokens that will go down in value. But as Tarun said, that happens in every cycle. So I don't think that's unique. There will probably be a lot of these tokens that are eventually traded for a fraction of what they're worth, and one or two of them that end up massively, massively valuable and are worth way more than they're even worth today, even though you might think today their valuations are eye-popping. And that's what venture looks like. That's what normal distribution of outcomes looks like for any cohort of technologies. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. We just ran over, and I think Tarun unfortunately had to run, so I think we'll have to wrap it up here. But Avichal, thank you for coming on and for sharing your perspectives. And thank you for, now that Tarun's
my
gone,
excellent Tarun impression.
You are now elected Tarun now that Tarun is off. So anyway, thank you for coming on board and sharing your perspective with us.
Good to see you.
We can have you on again soon. Thanks, everybody.